As is the practice, we have 30 minutes for presentations for each presenters, and about 30 minutes for discussion towards the end of the three, after the end of the three presenters as such. Now, let me call upon the first presenter, as in the order that has been published in the on the book of abstracts and the schedule that has been fixed. Let me call upon Professor Mohankumar in this particular session. Let me just give a brief introduction to Professor Mohanakumar. Professor Mohanakumar is the professor and director in charge of the Institute for Development Studies in Jaipur. His areas of specialization are political economy of agriculture and development, animal husbandry, panchayat raj system, decentralization, labor and environmental issues, and so on. He is also an alumnus of Center for Development Studies, and thereafter he had been uh, with the Institute for Development Studies in Jaipur. Before that, he was with the Center for CSRD in Jawaharlal Nehru University doing his PhD as well. And I know him from those days. Welcome, Professor Mohan Kumar. The floor is for you to speak on changing labor market in Kerala and its implications for the global market. Please take that.
Thank you, Vinoj Abraham, for your kind introduction. Let me, the paper that I'm, may know my slide is visible?
No, it's not visible.
It is not
It's
visible.
not visible.
Yeah. Okay, let me take a few minutes to make it.
You can go to share.
Yeah, I am doing it. Hello. Oh. Yes, I'm taking a few minutes. Like there is.
Yeah, now it's visible.
Now it is visible. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Is fine now. Yeah,
Just
this is a joint paper, and I would like to take the apology first for having changed my topic slightly from the abstract I have circulated. So the abstract was about changing content of rural labor market in Kerala, which I have made it in the context of pandemic when it was made to a draft paper. So precisely I am talking about the rural labor market in Kerala analysis in the context of pandemic.
excuse me, Mohankumar. Can
Yeah.
you just make it big screen, full screen? Can you make it full screen?
Yeah. Oh, sure. I am making it.
Yeah.
Is it okay now?
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay,
Please
fine.
do.
Okay. The two broad objectives that I am going to address in the paper is how and in what forms rural rural surplus population did cope up with the situation of not being able to find buyers to sell their labor power for livelihood during the pandemic. And second, what are the impacts of changes in the labor market outcome in relation to other major provinces in the country? As you know that the research on Kerala is one of the states in India where the rural labor market is, to a great extent sufficiently explored. And in the 70s, 60s and 70s, it was the labor militancy and trade union movement, particularly in the agriculture sector and in the unorganized sector, with focus on agriculture laborers. In the 70s and 80s, it was basically the wage relativity issues the construction boom from remittance income and how it has translated into the high wage hike in the unorganized sector for laborers in Kerala. Most of the research were focused on that. K.P. Kannan's article in Journal of Peasant Studies as puzzles in Kerala and T.N. Krishnan study on wage relativity concepts. All these papers, in a sense, was trying to argue that There is a puzzle in Kerala. There is a relative backwardness of industrial sector, and agriculture paddy has been declining, but at the same time wage has been rising on the other side. And Professor T. N. Krishnan tried to argue out, taking cue from the Smithian concept of wage relativity. He argued that it is because of the boom in the construction sector due to remittance income that get translated to the rural wage hike in the state of Kerala. So in the 90s there are many migration studies, and in the first half of the 20 in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, 21st century, we have a number of studies on the Narega labor in the participation of laborers in MGNREGA, as well as the in the later part, in the last 2 3 years, there are studies 2 years, there are studies on pandemic impact of pandemic on the rural labor market. This is broadly the contours of labor studies in the state of Kerala. And what has not been, as I understand, not has been sufficiently explored is the so-called labor process. Why this has been happening, and almost all studies are confining to the hypothesis one way or other that it is precisely the labor militancy which has gone to the wage hike in the state of Kerala and its concomitant consequences on the material production sector of the economy. So, in this context, I would like to draw your attention to what I will be talking about in the few slides which I am going to present is that uh, is about the theoretical perspective which Marx has talked about, relative rural surplus population in his volume Das Capital Volume 1 as part of the capital accumulation process. I find that the concept of I think the concept of rural surplus population has relevance in the present day context of pandemic. And before that, I would say, before there are a few national and international reports which have come in 2000, the later part of 2021 and 2022, and it says that the inequality in developing countries in India as well as in other countries in the Asian world over, there has been a rise in inequality during the pandemic period. This is brought out by the World Inequality Report, spearheaded by Lucas Stansel and Thomas Piketty and others. And very recently, there is a report by ILO, and the report says World Employment and Social Outlook Trends 2022. And the ILO reports, what it shows is that the countries like India, particularly some countries in Asian countries and African countries, would take time to spring back into normalcy in the labor market, and it is very likely that there will be a time lag of 3 to 4 years for the employment to resume to the level that it was in the pre-pandemic phase. And Center for Monitoring the Indian Economy, their quarterly reports on employment and unemployment, which I am using it for the present study, has worked out the employment figures and unemployment rates on a quarterly basis during the pandemic period. And the inequality report is very important in the context that how it is going to impact on the rural sector. And broadly, it says that it doesn't talk about the state-wise figures, but at the national level, it says during the pandemic period, the top 10% of the population in India hold 57% of national income, while 1% earn 22% of the national income. And bottom 50% of the population hold only 13% of national income in the country. The level of inequality, that is a major finding of the study, the level of inequality in India is as huge as at the peak of Western imperialism in the early 20th century. This is what the pandemic has contributed. And the CMI data says India's unemployment rate has increased from 4.7% in 2017-18 to 7.91% in December 2021, immediately after the first phase of the pandemic. Between 2019-20 and December 2021, manufacturing sector lost 9.8 million jobs in India. Unemployment in rural area increased from 5.8% to 7.28% between 2021 and September-December 2021. And unemployment in urban areas increased from 8.0% to 9.3%. So the World Employment and Social Outlook report of the ILO informs that it is very unlikely that the countries in Asia would spring back to its normalcy of employment situation in the immediate future, even after the pandemic. So in this context that I use the theoretical framework which I have taken MGNREGA wage as the reference here. As I have already mentioned, that as part of capital accumulation process, in order to explain the long-run tendency of the wage rate, it to converge into the socially determined standard of living or subsistence wage across countries and sectors in a country. Marx argues that the reserve labor force, that rural reserve labor force, which he categorizes into 4 segments. First segment is floating labor force. That floating, in the process of economic slowdown and economic revival, the rural surplus population, which is generated in the process of capital accumulation, get changed. And these 4 categories appear to be very important to explain the rural labor market situation in Kerala and in the present day world in the pandemic context. Floating labor force is the labor force who are thrown out from employment because of the economic slowdown in the present day context is due to pandemic. But they are not much worried about. They are adequately skilled, young, able-bodied people. It will get reabsorbed as soon as the economy springs back into its normalcy. So they are not much worried about the temporary situation of unemployment. But more worrisome is the second category, that is called latent labor force in the rural side of the country. Latent labor force are those who were in the petty business and or in the agriculture sector as farmers, small and marginal farmers, or agriculture laborers, or in the unorganized sector, in the secondary labor market of the unorganized sector. They have been thrown out of employment because of the slowdown, and a vast section of the latent labor force is quite unlikely to get back to employment, because there is they are the people who are not adequately skilled enough, and at the same time, this segment of the labor force might have lost their means of their thin means of production. Like I can cite an example in Rajasthan, where I am staying now, where during the pandemic period, the farmers who have been supplying milk to the urban households in flats in Jaipur have been prevented from entering to the flats premises to supply their milk in the morning, and in the milk drinking states in northern India. It has happened all over. Though the farmers, the animal husbandry, cattle rearing, livestock farmers were left with no other option but to sell out their livestock at a throwaway price, because there was no buyers for their milk. They were not allowed to enter the premises of the market where they sell their produce, and those people have lost their source of livelihood as well as their means of production. These are all the people who are unable to go back to employment even after the pandemic. But a section of them will be able to go back, and another section of the labor force we can call them guest workers. They are waiting for an opportunity in the semi-skilled and unskilled labor market, either to migrate to other states in India or to abroad. But the social outlook report of the ILO says that the world, the market for unskilled and semi-skilled laborers in the world global market is going to be highly pressurized because there will be huge supply of labor from different countries in Asia, and this there is a every possibility of wage deflation. And the third category is stagnant labor force. They are the worst sufferers of the pandemic phase, which I am, they are ready to sell their labor power, but they have already been thrown out of employment. And these are all the aged workers and less able-bodied, as well as they have no specialized skill other than the kind of skill that they have acquired through the division of labor that has been existing in the particular area, like manual laborers who have been working in rubber plantations, like tapping laborers. They know only tapping. Those kind of people are called stagnant laborers, and they are unable to come back to normalcy, and they will be permanently thrown out of employment for different reasons, or they possess very little skills, and physically also they are not able-bodied. And Marx has also talked about peripheral labor force in the rural sector, and he used the word dangerous class of people because they are the mendicants and the kind of a section of the labor force from the stagnant labor force, which is which is sediments in the rural labor market at the bottom of the layer. They are left with no other option but will be thrown to destitute. And in this section, this is the major four categories of labor which Marx has used to explain why in the long run the wage rate will not rise beyond a point and always converge on the socially determined level of wages. Precisely this has an implication. In this, to explain this, I am extremely sorry that I will be supplying a few tables on the MGNREA recent trends. It will explain how the rural labor market in Kerala could absorb a section of the stagnant, latent, and peripheral labor force into the sector. And see, you look at the performance indicators. The performance indicators says I'm sorry, but yeah. See, the performance indicator says I am taking the comparison with the 2011, 12, and 2021. I am also clubbing a primary survey which I have conducted of Narega workers in 4 districts in Kerala. And you look at the statistics, and job cards issued as percentage of total rural households in 2021, this was the pandemic period, has substantially increased, not only in India, but not only in Kerala, but in India also it has gone up. There is nothing to talk about it because it is you can say it is a universal trend. But the more important is, this is what the latent women percentage as percentage of total days has remained, slightly declined by 2%. But the importance is that as compared to the national average, women percentage as percentage of the total mandates supplied to Narega is almost double in Kerala. But because of the pressure from the male labor force, it could be that there was a decline in the COVID period, and there could be some few other reasons as well, you can say. And then SC/ST, there has been an increase as compared to 11-12. The supply of labor force to Narega from 15.61 to 18.41, but it is on a lower side as compared to the national average. And the ST population is also on a lower side. In the case of ST population, even during the pandemic and during our primary survey, we have noticed that in Wayanad district, which was one of our sample district in for Narega, the ST population, particularly female laborers, single women-headed female laborers told us that they don't want to work in Narega because Narega wage disbursement takes a month, and the Adivasi workers are not welcomed without, they don't get the petty shop owners in the rural area do not welcome the Adivasis for taking their daily provisions on credit. So if they don't get wage on a daily basis, they are unable to buy their provisions in the evening as they usually do. But other general and OBC category women and others have some kind of leverage at home that they can finance their daily provision even if they don't get wage in the evening. That is why that is precisely one of the reasons why they withdraw from the Narega market. But the last column row in the slide shows that the material cost spent per as percentage of labor cost is relatively less. That means the out of the total amount spent on Narega in Kerala, it is much on a higher side as compared to the national average. And households availed employment, 100 days of employment, that in Kerala, it is much on a higher side as compared to the national average. This is what I am arguing, that to a great extent, the stagnant and latent labor force in the rural surplus population that Narega could absorb. And now, see, who are the people work in Narega? In the context of Kerala, if we take an age-wise distribution of workers in Narega, we find that in 2021, about the people relatively, elder in the elderly age group, their proportion has gone up from 23 to 30%. At the national level, it is only 19%. And the look at the age group 13 to 14, there has been a substantial decline in the proportion of people who are working in Narega from 25 to 14. And at the national level, it is about 13%. This is the contradiction which we find in the employment in Narega in Kerala, because the elderly people means above 60, it is 22%. At the national level, above 60 people who are engaged in Narega manual work is only 10%. So the elderly people get absorbed. They are basically the stagnant reserve pool of laborers who are left with no other option but either to depend on the earning members of the family or to turn destitutes. And this is a kind of precarious the precarious class of people with the gas standing and others have argued out in the later on the development of the same rural surplus population theorization of Marx. And what has happened? Like women days, basically it is the women labor force who have been thrown out more than male during the economic slowdown and pandemic period. And as a result, from the very beginning, as compared to the national average, participation of women in Narega wage rate, as when we take it as the total number of working days that women availed, is much on a higher side as compared to the national average. It's about 90.49 and 52.97 in 2021, and all through it is almost the same. There is no substantial, but this is what remaining. But there has been an argument that the employment in Narega is basically a distress form of employment, that people have no other option but household women who are educated, but at the same time they want to get into some form of employment, go for Narega. But if we look at the district-wise trend, what it shows is that, take the case of Idiki, where there is a provision, seasonal employment in plantation sector like coffee, tea, and cardamom. There, the employment received by a worker, average number of days received by a worker is much less than the state average. Of course, average number of days availed by a worker in Kerala is significantly higher than the national average, but across district there are differences, and the difference is mainly explained by the availability of alternative gainful employment. To an extent, it can be argued that the Narega employment is a kind of distress employment, partly because the average wage rate doesn't form even 1/4 of the market wage rate that exists in every village. So we have worked out a statistical exercise, logic model. It is in what determines the labor force participation in Narega. We have used four variables. One is the education level of workers. Second is the age, and third is the economic category like APL, BPL, and others. And then we have the gender. What determines? And this table is showing that basically what the table shows is that BPL category have a odd ratio which is above 1. That means mostly people in the BPL category work in Narega as compared to, it is not a major great finding because it is common sense. But SC/ST, if you take their odd ratio is 1.58, and SC and ST put together, that shows that the SC/ST people population work in Narega more than the general category and OBC. And about the education level, it is relatively uneducated, like illiterate. If you take illiterate, then the people with the primary education are not adequately skilled enough to have employment in other sectors. They are employed more. And if we take the age group, which we have already seen, that the age group above 60 have an odd ratio which is about 7. That means they are the people who are mostly employed. But the determinants of employment in Narega broadly converges with the theoretical framework which has been shown in the initial part of the presentation. That shows that it is because the people who have been thrown out of employment, who have no other option due to the unskilled, relatively low pace of their skill, or age structure, or their social background and economic background, they come forward to receive employment under Narega. So what I am trying to say in this case is, why it is basically, this table is from the primary survey. We asked this question: why do you want to participate in Narega? And they said, because we are BPL households. And why women? Even otherwise, they are not available in the labor market. 23% of the women said it is a government program. So the social taboo associated with the work in the manual work outside their house is to a great extent taken care of because of its seal as a government program. That is what 23% of the people who have reported that we are working on that. Now, I am getting into the last part of the presentation. A month before, the Crime Records Bureau presented its statistics on suicides. As you know, Kerala suicide rate, I have calculated with the per lakh population, but it is not adjusted for age, because state-wise age profile of the suicides is not supplied by Crime Records Bureau. What has happened is that the Crime Records Bureau says that there has been a massive spike in the suicide rate due to unemployment in India. So we wanted to know what has happened in Kerala, because Kerala is one of the states where general suicide rate, at the national level, it is 14.52 in 2020, but in Kerala it is 29.86. That is general suicide rate. It is almost, you can say double. But if you take the reasons, Crime Records Bureau also supplies the reasons. If you take the reasons, then the reasons is that the under the suicides due to unemployment per lakh population in Kerala is, of course, it is higher than the national average, but as compared to the general suicide rate, the suicides due to unemployment in the state during the pandemic, this is what the report fetched, could fetch more attention during the period. There is a spike in suicides due to unemployment, but it did not happen. There has been a decline. In 2020, suicides due to unemployment in Kerala as compared to 2016, there is a marginal decline. And to a great extent, what we have observed in the trend in Narega employment, it can be partly explained partly because of the state intervention. But the question is unemployment, the CMI data, what it says. CMI data on unemployment, CMI gives two types of data on unemployment. One is the unemployment of active job seekers and unemployment of passive job seekers. They are in the labor market, but they are not bothered about whether, because they have almost been convinced that they are not going to absorb the labor market, but they don't seek job. But we have taken only the unemployment due to active job seekers. What it says is that during the pandemic period, it to a certain extent, I am relating with the suicides due to unemployment. Unemployment in 2021 January, April, and 3 quarters they have given. See, at the national level, it is 7.31%. During the pandemic peak 2021 September-December period. At the in Kerala, it is marginally less. But the worrisome factor is there has been a substantial decline in the labor force participation rate. Where the laborers have gone, they have withdrawn from the labor market, or to go back to our theoretical framework, whether they have gone to stagnant labor force or inactive laborers in the rural labor market. They have stopped searching for job and announced themselves that they are not available for employment, or some kind of job which is, in technical terms, we can say they are reproducing outside the the market relations of production, as producing, cultivating their own land for home consumption and that kind of thing, or some kind of employment which is not visible in the market. That substantially there has been a decline in the workforce participation rate in Kerala as compared to the national average. So this can be this is what I have explained. Labor force participation rate in the during this period. There is a difference between male and female.
Excuse me,
Yeah, I'm closing it.
You can take about a minute or so. Yeah.
See, what I'm trying to say is that, in conclusion, various studies on employment situation in India and the world inform that there will be a mounting pressure in the labor market in the next few years. The unemployed are less likely to be reabsorbed into gainful economic activity, particularly in countries like India. Labor importing countries would buy the labor force rather cheap. Its impact on Kerala needs detailed analysis. Narega in the state has performed relatively better, and it could facilitate absorption of a substantial part of latent and stagnant reserve labor force into employment. It is particularly so during the pandemic. During the pandemic, suicides due to unemployment in Kerala was relatively less because of active state intervention. Could be because of, it is one of the hypotheses that I am forwarding. I have not tested it. There has been substantial decline in the workforce participation rate during the pandemic, and the productive labor has gone invisible or joined the rank of precarious reserve pool of laborers. It is a matter of serious concern. Thank you for your forbearance and patient listening. Thank you all.
Thank you, Professor Mohanakumar. Interesting study on how rural labor has been absorbed in the MGNR regions during the pandemic. It's quite, I'm sure it will elicit some questions later on. We'll come back to that later. Now let's go to the next paper by, one second. The title of the paper is Tourism and Livelihoods, a study of Kovalam in Kerala. This is being presented by Ms. Nalini Netto. I'm sure all of you are aware of this particular name. Nalini Netto had retired as the Chief Secretary in Kerala. She is currently pursuing her doctoral dissertation on tourism and development in Kerala at CDS. She's a retired officer of the Indian Administrative Services. She draws upon her extensive experience of her career spanning 37 years, spreading over a number of domains, including tourism. A postgraduate in chemistry from the University of Kerala. She did her MPhil in applied economics from Center for Development Studies and an MA in rural development from the University of East Anglia, UK. Now, may I call upon Ms. Nalini Netto to make her presentation on the said topic. Thank you. Can't hear you, ma'am. We can't hear you, ma'am. I think you're on mute, ma'am.
Hello, am I audible? Hello?
Yes, you are, ma'am. You are.
Audible, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. Can I begin? Can I start?
Yes,
Vinoj?
yes,
Yeah.
yes, ma'am. Yes, please go.
Actually, this is a picture of Kovalam, but what I intend to explore through this presentation is a picture that is behind this picturesque Kovalam beach. Okay.
Can you put it big screen, ma'am?
Okay. Pardon?
Can you put the PPT on full screen?
Yeah. It's on full screen.
Yes.
Yeah. The glossy picture of Kerala tourism, based on demand and supply statistics, is oblivious to the realities at the micro destination level. Conventional performance indicators of the demand and supply of tourism are only one side of the coin, necessitating the need to look beyond bald statistics. The lopsidedness in the extant literature, which is tilted more towards the various aspects of developing and marketing tourism, rather than the issues relating to tourism as a strategy for development, points to a clear research gap. Economic development initiatives like responsible tourism provide a platform for the interaction of destination communities are fairly recent. Tourism scholars generally have a tendency to abstract tourism from the broader context in which it occurs to focus on their specialization. It results in a partial picture that does not adequately appreciate the links between tourism and other sectors, overlooks the context in which tourism occurs. Taking the road less traveled, to view tourism through a systemic lens enables us to get different pictures depending on how far we zoom in or zoom out. Zooming in enables thinking holistically in the process of progressing towards a mutual goal with higher levels of participation at the local level and helps reveal dynamics that otherwise remain hidden. Initiatives of responsible tourism, largely based on the triple bottom line sustainability framework, the underlying principle for balancing economic, social, and environmental arenas are fairly recent, roughly a little more than a decade old in the state. The present paper is an attempt to delve a little deeper into the aspects of tourism as a livelihood option for the local communities. The study focuses on Kovalam, one of the oldest nations in the state, with probably the longest history of tourism involvement. It is also one of the four destinations in the state where a responsible tourism initiative was implemented on a pilot basis. by profit, tourism cannot on its own left to itself be considered kind to the poor. But it's a fact that a number of destinations are in developing countries which are home to millions of poor. Literature reviews suggest tourism studies are wanting in investigating direct relationship between tourism and poverty. Debate regarding potential trade-off between tourism, growth, inequality, and poverty is conspicuously lacking in tourism literature. Contribution of tourism to poverty alleviation remains debatable, although quantifiable evidence has been documented, and pathways highlighted through which benefits of tourism can be maximized for the poor people. The PPT concept, which was not coined until 1999, potential of tourism had been discussed in academic circles published in articles published before 1985 itself. Big Cat in the Bible, 1979, which is the Bible of tourism, a passport to development, indicated that tourism brings about jobs, backward linkages with agriculture and other sectors, and provides opportunities, particularly for young people. Even prior to that was the pioneering study in tourism and development in the Commonwealth Caribbean by Dryden. Later studies also found that tourism improves the quality of life for poor people through funding basic facilities, education, and training. Till the millennium, tourism development had not incorporated poverty elimination objectives. The first decade of the millennium saw an upsurge of interest from the governments and development organizations in a tourism-based approach to poverty alleviation. I'm not going into the history of pro-poor tourism PPT and sustainable tourism elimination of poverty, but these are the concepts which sprang up in the beginning of the millennium. Factors that encourage or constrain economic participation of the poor in tourism, according to Ashley, are participation, holistic livelihoods approach, distribution, flexibility, commercial realism, and learning. Rowe points out that a number of criticism of pro-poor tourism. Foreign private interests drive tourism, making it, in many cases, making it difficult to maximize local economic benefit. Tourism can impose substantial non-economic costs on the poor through loss of access to resources, particularly beaches, displacement from agricultural land, and social and cultural disruption and exploitation. It is also vulnerable to changes in the economic conditions in the originating markets, which cause major swings in the level of tourism in the destination. And international visitor levels are also vulnerable to civil unrest, crime, pandemics, political instability, and natural disasters in addition. Now we come to tourism and livelihoods. Intrusion of tourists along with their money power transforms the local community's environment, culture, and activities, changing it from a source of direct sustenance with value, commodity with an exchange value. Development of rural tourism necessitates that the traditional means of economic livelihood, when removed from a community or truncated from a community, is replaced by an alternative. This commodification brings about a shift in the relationship between the community and the environment, from one working with the land to one of working for the tourists who observe the land. There are a number of arguments put forth in favor of introducing tourism as a means of livelihood for the poor. Tourism can be a way to complement existing rural livelihood strategies of rural communities by diversifying off-farm income and spreading risk. If there is a drought, the impact on tourism is likely to be smaller and more lagged than the impacts on agriculture. So it helps reduce risk for primary commodity exporters, particularly as tourism has suffered less price fluctuation than any other export industry, such as minerals, agricultural goods, etc. So on various fronts, even if a currency collapses, tourism is less likely to suffer than the rest of the economy, as cheaper currency attracts more tourists. So this leaves those with access to tourism industry less vulnerable than others. Tourism can also complement other livelihood activities in a number of ways. Development of transport, markets, and other infrastructure can produce other productive activities, achieve economies of scale. Skills earned through tourism can be transferred to other industries as well. If tourism supports local conservation, this in turn sustain other aspects of livelihood that depend on the natural resource base. Such studies of tourism livelihoods in various countries are available in literature. And one of the earliest studies is on Kenya, where they point out that when there's a decline of tourism in the state, in the country, which resulted in a severe hardship for the poor, particularly in areas where livelihoods were tourism based. The study showed that women responded differently to the crisis. They were faster to retract from tourism related activities and turn to others, which though less remunerative were more stable. Among the many policy prescriptions, in the case of decline in tourism and consequent loss in jobs or livelihoods, Importance of avoiding a monocrop commitment to tourism at the household level is highly essential. Ensuring credit support to support productivity and alternate livelihoods. Putting in place savings avenues such as microfinance programs and cooperatives. In fact, one of the very pertinent studies relating to the vulnerability of tourism livelihoods in the case of tourism is that of beach vendors of Bali in the context of terrorist attacks. Baker and Coulter found that access to essential assets contracted sharply after the terrorist bombings. Access to financial capital, so essential to sustaining livelihoods, collapsed almost immediately. Lack of alternate sources of income or social support in any other form of safety net left the vendors vulnerable, struggling to survive and unable to sustain the earlier improvements in livelihoods built on tourism. This questions the wisdom of encouraging tourism as a significant vehicle for socioeconomic development in the world's poorer countries, particularly where economic diversification is limited, where threats of disruption from a range of shocks, both external and internal, are always possible, and this means to cope with these are simply unavailable. Tourism can never be a foundation for development of sustainable livelihoods, is what those authors said in a study of Bali, particularly for those working at the margins of the sector without a proper fallback position to reduce vulnerability. There are a lot more of studies, but now I come to the objective of the present study. Just against this backdrop of tourism as a livelihood, we come to this plus minus broadly described in the introductory part. The objective of my study is to understand the scope of tourism livelihoods in a broader context, to examine the sustainability of tourism livelihoods in the context of Kovalam, a micro destination in Kerala. Now, coming to the context of the study, I'm very briefly describing only. Kovalam, located along the coast 16 kilometers from the capital city of Thiruvananthapuram, is probably one of the first tourist spots to be frequented by international travelers in Kerala. I'm not getting into the statistics of tourism in Kovalam here, not main focus. But pattern of tourism in Kovalam is undergoing a change with the international component showing a decrease.
Now we cannot hear.
I think there is an issue with your audio. We're not able to hear you, ma'am. We can't hear you. We can only see you. Video is visible.
Now am I audible?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
You are. Yes, you are.
Up till this context of the study. Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
I was talking about the context of the study.
Yes, please continue with the context of the study.
Yeah. Kovalam was a fishing village with agriculture also forming an important economic base of the region, the major crop being coconut. It is interesting to note that world over, many of the beach resorts have earlier been simple fishing villages, and where fishing villages have been transformed into towns for tourists as in the case of Caribbean and Mediterranean coastlines, tourism urbanization is a striking feature. Studies of similar cases are studies on Pattaya Beach in Thailand, which also transformed from a simple fishing village to the center of international tourism. Other examples are Boracay Beach in Philippines and Cancun in Mexico. Of course, the pattern of development of these transformation from the fishing village to the present tourism arena are different. They have followed different pathways. Many are having state-sponsored tourism, where state planned tourism development. Closer to Kovalam also, we have another destination where again traditional fishing and tourism are clashing, and that is Varkala, where a doctoral dissertation has already been done by Macmin in 2006 in the University of London. She has compared the traditional fishing and tourism as two livelihoods and the problems and the comparisons. Many of the economic activities in Kovalam, toddy tapping, extracting coconut oil from copra, manufacturing coir from husks, and trading in these products, all centered around coconut groves. With the construction boom, quarrying became a major economic activity, attracting many low-income groups, particularly women and children. Kovalam was traditionally thus an agricultural and fishing area which evolved into an urban outgrowth over a period of time with the growth of tourism. Displacement and dislocation of locals was an inevitable fallout. Many families, mostly fishermen, have been displaced from the land acquired by the government for the implementation of the hotel projects by the ITDC and ATDC without much resistance from them, mainly owing to the perception that they were mainly meant for government projects and high expectations of benefits from for the locals. Lack of awareness on the part of those evicted and the lukewarm response of the social and political institutions were added factors. Two of the studies, the earlier studies on Kovalam, one by Dr. Vijay Kumar in 1993, mentions about the change of livelihood in a very nice way. Many fishermen had to make a shift in their livelihood on account of this displacement. They became boatmen ferrying tourists to the high sea in catamarans, country-made wooden boats. A detailed study of the existing patterns in Kovalam and a comparison with one destination in Goa has also been done by Sudishna Babu in 2006, a doctoral dissertation of JNU. From all these, what we understand is community is a key stakeholder in tourism development, whose livelihoods are inevitably impacted by tourism. Now, I come to the methodology used for my study. One way of understanding the challenges and prospects of tourism is by studying the tourism impacts the poor people or the local economies at tourism destinations. Tourism obviously does not occur in a tabula rasa on an empty slate. It is incorporated into an existing system. So, approach that is followed is the sustainable livelihoods approach. I'll just briefly explain it. The research methods which normally be used for a study of understanding how tourism impacts the poor in a locality at the micro level is by livelihood analysis, do the enterprise analysis, local economic mapping, and pro-poor value chain analysis. Of these, livelihood analysis is often considered particularly appropriate to assess smaller scale, more rural and community-based tourism activities from the perspective of the local people, and the focus being generally on the poor communities close to the tourist product. The unique contribution of this approach, compared to the other three, is its framework to incorporate non-financial effects, enabling to look beyond cash incomes, and it calculates other forms of capital, natural, physical, human, and social, covering a range of dynamic effects in addition to financial capital, providing a more nuanced view of how tourism benefits the poor. Not only for the direct participants, but also for the other local people not directly involved. Wage income in such cases is thus only one element of the livelihood security, along with other activities and assets of critical importance. Now, livelihood analysis bases assessments on actual observable impacts and views of the local community rather than on assumptions. It is what means to the poor people at the destination more than just financial impact, and that forms the basis of the significance of intervention through tourism. Though the livelihood approach does not cover the kind of big picture dynamic impacts on economic growth, it does cover those relating to access to natural assets, participants' capacity to influence policy, and changes in other economic activities. It is an actor-oriented perspective in development studies with its focus for the local context, policy relevance, and consideration of non-financial issues along with the direct effects. And this is found to be best suited for the study. I'm just putting this DFID SL framework diagram. In a depiction of theories, themes, and policy thrusts that have been influential in rural development thinking since the 1950s on a timeline, Ellis and Biggs place sustainable livelihoods approach as an idea of the decade beginning 2000. It is a form of it is from the decade beginning 2000 that the SL approach has been widely deployed as a guiding principle for rural development practice. A remarkable story of research influencing policy. The emergence of the sustainable livelihoods approach brought about a paradigm shift with its focus on people and their strengths and opportunities. Sustainable livelihood framework aims to help stakeholders with different perspectives to engage in structured and coherent debate about the many factors that affect livelihoods, their relative importance, and the way in which they interact. Centered on people, it presents the main factors that affect people's livelihoods and the typical relationships among them. It does not try to present a model of reality, nor does it work in a linear manner. The Sustainable Livelihoods Framework is an attempt to conceptualize livelihoods in a holistic way, capturing its many complexities, constraints, and opportunities, they are subjected to. These constraints and opportunities are shaped by numerous factors, ranging from global or national level, trends and structures over which the individuals have sometimes very little control and may not even be aware of, uh, to more local norms and institutions, and finally, the assets to which the household or the individual has direct access. The household is used as a unit of analysis, recognizing that not all individuals within a household have equal decision making power or benefit equally from household assets or income. Now, for my actually, I began my study with a primary survey of households in a column. A household in my study means a household that has at least one source of income from a tourism livelihood. And the data was the number of people. The basic data was got from Responsible Tourism Mission, because Responsible Tourism Mission um, was focusing on the livelihoods. So the number of people who are with tourism livelihoods, those respondent data was collected, and the population was divided into non-overlapping groups of strata along a relevant dimension, in this case, according to the type of tourism livelihood or activity. And stratified random sampling with proportional allocation was adopted for identifying the respondents for the study. In fact, I grouped them into 5: agricultural or farm products, people engaged in food products, traditional um, industries or handicrafts, services which include good range of things like village experience, uh, homestays, taxi drivers, chauffeurs, laundry, etc. And then people who are involved in entertainment and cultural programs.
Ma'am, we have lost your audio again. Not audible, ma'am. Yeah, it's better now.
Better. Okay. Yeah. So a structured household questionnaire split into 4 broad thematic sections was developed. Elicit as much information as relevant to the study of households as possible. In fact, it was basically divided into 4 sections. The first section dealt with the basic household information. The second dealt with assets and liabilities. Third with livelihood activity. And the fourth was a group of statements, like a liquor type statements, to be answered from strongly disagree 1, strongly agree 5, all of which relate to the livelihood assets, the various livelihood assets, and how the participants felt about them. Know how clear this slide is. Total of 30 livelihood asset indicators were identified from the data set based on literature, specific tourism, and grouped into 5 groups of assets, namely natural capital, physical capital, human capital, social capital, and financial capital. And the measurement indicators under each of these capitals. Natural capital has, I'll just quickly read them out. Owners free and uninterrupted access to common property resources, sufficient water for households and income activity, other economic activities, proper waste management system, pollution-free natural resources, enhanced awareness about environment in the community, ready availability of raw materials at cheap rate, cheap, okay, that many. Then the physical capital, periodically maintained road networks, public transport facilities, uninterrupted power supply, properly maintained street lights, uninterrupted water supply, well-maintained public toilets, proper drainage facilities, land owned, type of house, consumer durables. Now, type of how I evaluated them, I'll explain. Human capital. In human capital, I looked at the education of the respondents, the language skills of the respondents, since they are working in tourism, and their skills, whether they are doing the traditional skill or whether they have upskilled or whether they are into a new skill. And predominance of tourism livelihood activity, tourism livelihoods. Social capital, again, I had indicators like absence of bribery and corruption, absence of antisocial activities like drug abuse and human trafficking, communal harmony, community bonding and mutual cooperation, women participation in tourism livelihoods, supportive role of NGOs, opportunity for skill acquisition for livelihoods, that many. And then to financial capital, I looked at the annual income, the income diversity, how much came from tourism, and access to borrowing. In fact, in all these cases, as the livelihood assets and their variables differ in terms of their type, dimension, and measurements, various scaling and indexing methods were adopted to make them comparable for meaningful interpretation. Variables relating to all capitals were weighted equally, owing to the complexity and subjective nature of weighting livelihood indices. Uh, in fact, wherever most of the cases I have used information which came from response to the mean values of the liquor type statements, which I scaled, brought it between 0 and 1 by normalization. Then for other things like land owned, I gave a scale, like type of house, I gave house sheet as one tile to uh, house with RCC roof. So graded numbers were given. In some cases, ratios were taken, like in case of consumer durables, I total number of options and the ratio of number of options to all options. Anyway, they were all brought to values between 0 and 1 for easy comparison. And also general guideline that tourism livelihood prospects increase with increased indicator value. Livelihood capital indices of between 1 and 0.67 I rated as high, 0.66 to 0.34 as medium, and 0.33 0 to 0.33 as low, respectively. As a pilot study and as part of a larger study, I took 29 respondents, each involved in a livelihood activity connected to tourism, as surveyed. Overlam. Actually, the survey took place over a period of time, and it was many of the things I repeated during the time of the pandemic, the thick of the COVID pandemic, which enabled me to get a response beyond what was even in the questionnaire. At 29, I'm just coming to the respondents, each involved in a livelihood activity. The profile of the respondents I'm showing in the next table. 72.4% were males and the remaining females. 96.5% of the respondents were in working age group, while 55.2% of the respondents did not have a secondary school living certificate in Kovalam. In fact, I did not have much of a choice on whom to select or whatever, because I based this entire selection on the list given by the Responsible Tourism Mission as people who were involved in at least one tourism livelihood. Okay. The family profile of the respondents was also investigated to understand the situation in which the livelihood activity is based. 0.5% of the respondents belong to APL families. 31% of the respondents belong to BPL, of which Antyodaya Anna Yojana families constituted just 6.9%. The other indicators types: land owned, type of house, family income, total indebtedness, vehicles owned, and all these things were also taken. But they, I'm not looking too much into it at this point because they all figure in the livelihood asset calculation as well. Respondents actually were grouped according to the category of livelihood. Also, more fall in the category of services and Kovalam. They are mostly taxi chauffeurs, one of the most vulnerable categories during the pandemic, because these taxi chauffeurs who are actually transporting and ferrying tourists do not get the regular traffic. And the pandemic time, they were one of the worst hit. When I spoke to them, most of them were more than sad. They were belligerent even. Coming to the share of tourism income to the total family income, it is seen that Kovalam has a high percentage of families. 34.5%, where more than 90% of the family income comes from tourism. This points to the low level of diversification of livelihood portfolios after tourism has appeared on the scene. Doing this thing, agricultural farm products is a very, very small percentage. Food products, in fact, the lion's share, more than 50%, is taken by services. And health tourism, of course, 6.9, entertainment 6.9, but agriculture and farm products, in which Kovalam earlier had a predominance, has now taken a backseat and has been truncated. Now I'm coming to the evaluation of how I've evaluated the livelihood indices. natural capital.
Ma'am, we have lost you again. Audio, we have lost your audio.
Problem with them. Okay,
Yeah, it's better, ma'am. It's better.
but okay. So I'm now coming to the livelihood index valuation of problem. As explained earlier, the various measurement indicators were obtained by scaling between 0 and 1 from the statements. If you free and uninterrupted access to common property resources, it is 0. It is again 0 for waste management. Coming to physical capital also, a destination which is more than half a century old roughly. So that is again, many of the accepting probably good public transport facilities and the individual houses and consumer durables, all other facilities are deplorable. The well-maintained toilets, 0. Proper drainage, 0. You have uninterrupted power supply is there in Kovalam, not to that extent. Supply is very bad. Many of these people had spoken to me about buying water in Kovalam. Now you come to human capital. Human capital again is better. It's better compared to the rest. It usually happens in places which have had a long history of tourism because there is a predominance of tourism livelihood. And many of these drivers, many of the people have language skills, even if they don't have educational backgrounds. Social capital again is not very low. It is medium. I would not rate it as very high compared to other basic Kerala standards because community bonding and cooperation in Kovalam, in addition to bribery and social elements, community bonding is one of the uh, items which is very low. This is basically, maybe if you have time to discuss, it can be done because this is basically on account of the fact that there is really no Kovalamite in Kovalam. All people who belong to Kovalam, they have either leased out their property or they have sold their property. And people who have come to Kovalam have come to make to profit. That is what the respondents told me. Many of the people who are having business in Kovalam are not people who have a love or who belong to Kovalam. Actually, on the financial capital again, annual income is pretty low. Diversity is 0.5. Access to borrowing is there, but that is through private money lenders. That is what, which is again not a very happy situation. They have money, but not through the right source. And now this radar diagram, which shows the livelihood pentagon, asset pentagon of Kovalam, it shows that is really not at all robust. It shows a very low value for very clear from this that it's a very low natural capital, a relatively medium values of social capital and human capital, and financial capital, physical capital, and natural capital are low. Now, the lack of robustness in this diagram to difficulty in coping with recovering from stresses of shocks and maintaining and enhancing capabilities and assets, providing sustainable livelihood opportunities in Kovalam. The lowest value of natural capital is really a cause for concern because as in the various other destinations in Kerala, Kovalam also depends on its natural capital for tourism as a tourism product. Now, I'll just briefly discuss the findings on the basis of the previous studies. Do I have time actually right now? How much time do I have?
Ma'am, time is up. Maybe you can take another 1 or 2 minutes to quickly conclude.
Okay, so discussion, but based on previous studies, I can do later, because all these issues, all these indicators which I have evaluated using this livelihood framework have been studied by various people at various points of time. And one study by Ghosh and Datta, assessing community perceptions on coastal tourism and environmental sustainability, they point out that the coastal village of Kovalam is on the thin line between survival and destruction, and needs more initiatives from all corners of society to protect itself from the havocs created by the consumerist urban industrial culture. And although it's one of the oldest destinations in the state, various aspects of physical capital present a very grim picture. The situation of human capital, as I said, is one of displaced locals. And traditional skills of the area, in addition to fishing and agriculture, all these areas have taken a backseat. And although these traditional skills can be channelized as tourism products, no concerted effort seems to have been made. As regards participation of women in livelihood activities connected to tourism, the evaluation of respondents was in the negative, and most of the people said we don't want women to work because it is really not safe and there's a security issue. Now, business is not going into further. In the present survey and analysis has indicated that tourism is a relatively recent livelihood portfolio that surfaced in Kovalam during its long history. It is far from being an innocent smokeless industry portfolio, helping only to diversify the existing livelihood and spread the risk. It is
Can't hear you, ma'am. Can't hear you. No, not yet, ma'am. Still not audible.
just 1 second. Hello.
Yeah, now it's. Okay.
Yeah. So tourism is far from being an innocent or a smokeless industry, helping only to diversify the existing livelihoods risk. It is also proved to be a portfolio which, while it came to diversify, it is quite risky. And when tourism is vulnerable and tourism and you can no longer have it as a livelihood portfolio, the respondents and the local destination communities have probably not much to fall back upon. The mode of development has not been able to stress on sustainable livelihoods, and fallback options are nearly absent. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nalini Netto, for that very interesting presentation on Kovalam tourism. There are already a few questions that are raised by Professor John Kurian there. We'll take those questions later on. She had put that in the beginning. She had put that working with land to working for tourists to observe the land. I think that succinctly puts the paper itself in perspective. We'll come back to the paper for more discussions later on. Thank you, ma'am. Now we'll go to Krishnapriya VS. She is presenting a paper on the state and the startup ecosystem, the case of Kerala. Krishnapriya is a doctoral scholar at the at CDS Trivandrum. Her research interests include economics of innovation, innovation-led development, and enterprise entrepreneurship. As part of her PhD work, she's analyzing the growth and performance of startups in India. She has also been successful in found early success in publishing one or two papers in very good journals also. Over to you, Krishnapriya. Can't hear you. Ah, okay. Please go.
I'll just share my screen.
Yeah.
Is it visible, sir?
Yes, it is.
Good morning, everyone. The topic of my presentation today is the making of an entrepreneurial state, an exploratory study on Kerala-based startups. So today's presentation is based on a primary survey that I had undertaken among Kerala-based startups. And thank you for this opportunity to present my preliminary results. Actually, it is still a work in progress. And if any comments or suggestions would be welcome, because this is probably the first time I'm actually undertaking a primary survey on my own. So the motivation for my study has been that Kerala's industrial sector has faced, Kerala's industrial sector has not really taken off, and it has been dominated by tertiary sector even before the industrial sector really got a chance to reach its full potential. And there have been several reasons cited for industrial stagnation in Kerala in the literature, such as weak industrial base or absence of diversification of industries, high levels of unionization and labor unrest, low public investments, and inability to adopt centralized models of industrial development are some of them. And though a manufacturing-led growth is often viewed as essential for large-scale employment generation and productivity enhancement, some studies have shown that in the presence of rapid growth of information technology sector and related sectors, service sector led or service sector driven growth is a possible option now. So Subramanian and Aziz had shown in as early as 2000 that Kerala has a comparative advantage in human capital, and Kerala should be focusing on knowledge-based industries by using this comparative advantage and trying to catch up with the. We should be using knowledge-based industries as a vehicle for catching up with other states or other countries. So service sector industry. So in a sense, service sector is a possible idea. And in the literature, it has also been seen that service sector industries are more amenable to entrepreneurship. The trajectory of technological change in the post-World War era, especially in the last decades of 20th century, have been in favor of industries where entrepreneurship is remunerative. So in such a context, where IT has kind of become a general purpose technology, and Kerala being one of an early adopter of IT and ITES, especially the Kerala government has been very proactive in promoting information technology and related industries through the setting up of Technopark, for example, at a time when most other states hadn't thought of it. Kerala has been an early adopter in this. And it is also interesting that Kerala has been recently, there has been a state startup ranking by the Government of India, which showed that it was published in 2018 and 19, and it showed that Kerala is a top performer in startup ecosystems. That is, it is quite interesting that Kerala, which was once notorious for having an unfriendly investment climate, now it has been ranked as one of the best performers or one of the best places in India to have to develop a startup. So it is in this context that I wanted to look at Kerala-based startups. So Kerala government has been very proactive in promoting startups. As I said, right from promoting IT industry, many other initiatives of the government, such as the Kerala Technology Startup Policy Act of 2014, came at a time when most other states hadn't taken such initiatives. The earliest incubator at Technopark started in 2006. So Kerala has been an early entrant into the startup arena, if we can call it so. So, however, there have only been some generalized reports on how startups in Kerala are performing, and there are some promising reports like Startup Genome, which says that there are startups in Kerala are doing well. There is a dearth of academic studies which are examining the basic characteristics of Kerala startups and their impact in terms of innovation or employment. Some of the cited reasons for promoting startups.
Shrimandri, I have your thing open among several things that are open here. Ma'am, I have sent your thing. Yeah, I feel. Thank you, ma'am.
Excuse me.
Then, though you said that the identity will not be known, When you ask the
Can
questions, you
can
will
others
know
please
that.
mute?
Because you've
Can others
asked at
please?
what level we work and
One second.
agenda and it doesn't matter. No, I'm just.
Can others please mute the mic? Please mute the mic. Others, those who are not speaking, please mute your mics. Continue, Krishna, please.
Okay, thank you, sir. So, as I was saying, apart from some generalized reports, there haven't been any academic studies in this regard. But so mine is an exploratory study of the basic characteristics of Kerala-based startups and their impact in terms of innovation or employment, employment. And these are some of the off-cited reasons for promoting startups. And such an exploration is also significant because it is an indicator of whether governmental efforts can drive development of startups in a region which has a low industrial and knowledge base. So this is my main objective. Before getting into the study, I want to clarify on what we understand by startup in the context of this study. Generally, in common parlance, startups are understood to be companies in the initial stages of business, and entrepreneurs are commonly understood to be people who are self-employed. However, in the literature, there is a clear distinction between necessity versus opportunity-driven entrepreneurship and replicative, innovative entrepreneurship. So, replicative or routine entrepreneurship is basically performing entrepreneurial activities in established markets. So clearly, where everything is known, well-known inputs, well-known technology. It is basically an imitative kind of entrepreneurship. Innovative entrepreneurship is more Schumpeterian kind of an entrepreneurship where basically the entrepreneur is operating in markets which are not yet fully developed or which are undergoing a change, or the entrepreneur himself is creating a market and using basically the production function is also not fully known. So the role of the entrepreneur in such contexts is very important because he or she has to make up for the knowledge deficiencies and market deficiencies through his or her own skills. So that is why startups are often called entrepreneurial firms. So typically these startups that I'm talking about in this presentation, they operate in markets which are emerging, and in these kind of firms, the role of the entrepreneur is very important. Some of the distinguishing features of startups has been that typically they have an innovative product or service. Generally, they are said to be disruptive innovations. That is, they create a new way of doing things, and there is a focus on speed and scalability. They want to grow fast and they want to achieve large scale in a short duration. They typically are in high-tech sectors like information technology, biotechnology, or in traditional sectors which are reinvented through application of technology, such as agricultural technologies, agri-tech, education technologies, ed-tech, fintech, all those things. In the context of India, the government has given a definition for startups. They have given some key features, identifying features. One is that the startups should be less than 10 years of age. They should be incorporated as private companies, partnership companies, or limited liability partnerships. They should have an annual turnover of less than 100 crores in all the financial years. They should be an original entity. That is, it shouldn't be a subsidiary of a larger firm, and they should be innovative and scalable. Now we go into the literature. So I won't take much time here, but I want to look at three strands of literature. One is startups in innovation, how startups promote, whether startups promote innovation, how they promote innovation. The second strand is startup and employment, and the third one is the role of the government in promoting startups. So when it comes to startup and innovation, many studies have shown that per capita innovation output and per capita R&D and R&D intensities of startups are generally higher than established firms. And innovation is often a strategy for startups. Innovation is often a part of the strategy for startups. And the reason for this that is cited in the literature is that the distinction between the employer and the employee is low in startups. And this reduces intra-firm hierarchy and eases information flow, and it reduces the cost of innovation. And most of the startups are loosely structured organizations without any clearly demarcated roles and responsibilities. When it comes to, so that is why startups generally tend to be more innovative. Startups, and when it comes to startups and employment, It is empirical works have shown that, especially in the context of US and OECD countries, where startups developed in the last stage of last few decades of the 20th century, they have shown that a disproportionate share of the new jobs created were in small companies, technology-based companies, with less than 20 employees. And but we may also note that I think it is generally known to everybody that many startups, the failure rate among startups is very high. Most startups exit within the first 10 years or remain small. Only a few of them grow exponentially. But what is seen is that the few that grow exponentially more than compensate for the job losses of all the others who fail. So it is the high growth trajectory of innovative startups that actually positively affect employment. Another channel of transmission that is seen is through innovation. So startups, generally innovative startups tend to have more employment growth. So that is another way in which innovation also contributes to employment growth in startups. Now we come to the role of the state in developing startups. So Professor Mariana Mazzucato's path-breaking work, The Entrepreneurial State, actually talks about government's proactive role in building nations' innovation and technological capabilities through risk capital. The literature on role of the state in development of startups is divided. I've looked at two strands of literature in that. One is the role of the government in providing entrepreneurial finance. That is, the main rationale for this is that there are often supply side gaps that arise in market for entrepreneurial finance because of information asymmetry in the market for external financing. So startups, because they are they're small firms who want to achieve high growth rates, they have a large appetite for funds, especially in the initial stages, but they may have a negative cash flow. They may not have a profit for many years together. So they find it difficult to get loans. So debt capital is practically inaccessible to them. Also, since they're small, they may not have collateral. So the option is to go for external equity financing. External equity financing, in the sense angel investment and venture capital investments. But for early stage firms, so angel investment and venture capital investment happens through their equity financing, in the sense that they instead of giving money as a loan, they give a share or stake of the startup is taken by the investor. They are more conducive for risk financing. However, in the early stages, there may be a credibility gap between firms because these investments are made based on market valuations. And for a small firm, which is in the initial stages of starting up, they may not have, they don't have any growth to show. They may not have a story to sell. So in such a case, they may find difficulty in accessing these external equity financing methods as well. So this is where the government has a key role. So when early stage startups who are in their early stages, who do not have access to any form of funding, that is when the government should enter. So in nascent ecosystems where seed and early stage funding opportunities are not fully developed, government support may be required to fill the gap. And government support is also a signal to other investors, so that if the government is investing in a startup, it kind of signals to other venture capital investors that the government sees some potential in the startup, and hence the startup may get more financing later on also, because the government is invested in it. And more importantly, governments have this power. They can direct their investments into companies that have social benefits, because other government venture capital can have a social motive as well, which the private venture investors will not have. The role of the government, apart from entrepreneurial finance, is also in institution building and incentivizing entrepreneurial efforts in directions that enhance the efficiency of the society. So they can use regulatory sandboxes and basically policy tools to ensure that entrepreneurial efforts are going in directions which are beneficial for the society. So it is in this context that we examine the role of the state in supporting Kerala-based startups. And like I mentioned, we use a primary survey. The study is based on a primary survey of a stratified random sample of Kerala-based startups. What I had done was, Kerala Startup Mission has on their website, they have a list of certified startups. and they have a list of they have given the proportion of startups in each industry. I have roughly tried to I've stratified my sample in roughly the same proportions. So around 30% of the startups are in IT sector. So 30% of my sample is also IT firms. I had contacted over 100 firms. Out of them, 61 responded positively and have participated in the study. But a few more have actually expressed interest. So the study is still ongoing. Actually, like few more have given me appointments to talk in the next couple of weeks as well. Data was collected through telephonic interviews and questionnaires, structured questionnaires, which were circulated via email. I had also used LinkedIn to get some information on entrepreneurial characteristics. One benefit that I had was that because these firms are all tech firms, most of them have, or actually all of them have LinkedIn accounts. So I could easily access their background, entrepreneur background and everything. I attempt to do a mixed methods kind of research using both quantitative and qualitative methods of analysis. So the basic characteristics of the sample, as I mentioned, the industrial distribution had been roughly that of the population. I have around 26% firms are in the IT services sector, 7.32 in the edtech, 7.32 in manufacturing, and 6.1 in health tech, as against 28% in the IT sector in the population. Other firms, other sectors involve agri-tech, fintech, biotech, space tech, etc. But I found some ambiguity in this because when I looked at the firms, some of the firms were categorized under under two sectors. Like if a firm is an edtech firm which is providing an online service, it comes both under IT services as well as under edtech. So this industrial distribution is a little ambiguous right now. But this thing, like other things such as the stage of operation, I have in terms of stage of operation, it is a largely uniform spread, but more firms are in the commercialization and scaling stages. But I have firms from which are in the prototype and minimum viable product stage. Some firms were doing beta testing and market validation, and right up to scaling stage. When it comes to business model, generally B2B businesses dominate the Kerala ecosystem. The sample also shows that there are more firms which are around 35% of the firms are B2B. But around 39% of the firms actually are B2B and B2C. They provide both direct to consumer as well as to businesses. Geographical distribution of the sample, around 85% of the firms in the sample are located in Cochin, Trivandrum, Kozhikode and Thrissur, as against 74% in the population. So apart from being the largest cities in Kerala, these cities also have like infrastructural investments by the government, like Technopark, Cyberpark, Info Park, Maker Village, etc. So this could be the reason for this geographical distribution of startups in these regions. One of the questions that I had asked were the reasons for choice of location in Kerala. So I had given a set of reasons and an option to give other reasons as well. So most of the founders said that they decided to start up in Kerala because they were born and brought up in Kerala or reside in Kerala. So generally, startup founders are largely Keralites, and because they have a home here, they find it logistically easier to start up here. Another popular reason was providing employment and making a difference to the state, to their home state. So some other reasons that were cited, which were that they had higher education in Kerala and work experience in Kerala, and government support and proximity to universities, especially ISRO and those universities have also affected people's founders' decision to locate themselves in Kerala. Good talent source as well as supporting infrastructure has also been major reasons. So the main takeaway, however, is that startup founders are largely Keralites. So it means that Kerala still has a nascent ecosystem. It caters largely to people who have a home here, unlike metropolitan cities where people actually relocate to those cities to start up. However, it's a little unfair to compare a state with that of a metropolitan city, especially since benefits of agglomeration are very high for startups. So here we are talking about the state as such, not just one city, right? One of the rather cheeky questions that I had asked was, what does Kerala offer? Does Kerala offer something that Bangalore or Delhi does not? I got many interesting replies for that. Many people said that the cost of operation, low cost of operation and reasonable salaries are one of the main reasons why they decided to choose Kerala, apart from the fact that they were born and brought up in Kerala. And this is especially beneficial for early stage firms. And some also said that it is an ideal location for market testing, especially a couple of high health tech firms mentioned that because of the high health indicators in Kerala, their services have a market here, and it is a good place to do beta tests. Another reason that people said was that there is a scope for market expansion because Kerala is an urbanized society with high demand for services. There is ample scope to expand within Kerala itself before venturing to other states. Then other reasons were benefits of having an urbanized city life without the congestion and pollution, low cost of living, low competition. Those were all some of the reasons that were cited. In some firms which were solving local problems, such as related to coconut, for example, they decided to set up in Kerala because they were solving a unique problem peculiar to Kerala. And at least 2 founders mentioned pandemic to be a reason for deciding to start up in Kerala because they were working from home and then they decided wanted to start something. When it comes to, so this is regarding starting up in Kerala. When it comes to operational office, around 40% of the startups have more than one operational office within or outside the state. So this is indicative of the fast growth that startups aspire for. 15.78% of the startups have operational offices outside Kerala, with Bangalore having the highest share, followed by Chennai. And other cities include Pune, California, Dubai, Nagpur, Andhra Pradesh. There were many other cities. But interestingly, around 5% of the sample mentioned that they operate from Bangalore and Chennai and do not have an office or employees working from their registered address in Kerala. They just registered in Kerala because they have a home here. So many of the founders, especially those who have had access to other ecosystems, either through education in other cities or through previous employment, they opt to have operational offices outside the state. And one important reason cited, apart from wanting to enter newer markets, is the availability of talent. Though Kerala has a pool of highly educated workers, founders in very niche or cutting edge technologies such as like artificial intelligence and electric vehicles, they mentioned that they moved outside to access specialized talent pool in these metro cities. Then founders with some of the key factors determining choice of location of operating office was familiarity with the place. So founders who have studied in Chennai, for example, tend to have an operational office in Chennai, something like that. And proximity to other startups is also an important consideration. Making a difference to hometown, that has also been an important consideration. Access to cheap office space. So the initiatives of the government in providing office space to startups is a welcome initiative here because that actually determines their decisions. And proximity to universities and research organizations. When it comes to entrepreneurial characteristics, we see that the age of the entrepreneurs range from 24 to 63, but the median age is 33. This is also similar to the international evidence in this sector, though there is a notion that startups are, because of maybe Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates, we have this notion that startups are started by like people in their 20s or college dropouts. It is seen that the studies show that the median age of entrepreneurship is 34, and some studies have even shown 35 to 39 in the case of US. Experience really matters in starting a startup. 99% of the founders in our sample have had some form of work experience, and 70% have had more than 3 years of work experience. Education, when it comes to education, 99% have a basic undergraduate degree. There was one college dropout, somebody who dropped out from NIT Calicut that was there in the sample. But he studied for 3 years. He dropped out in the last year. and he started his firm while he was in college. So around 60%, 62% are engineers, 15% are management professionals, and most often with an undergraduate engineering degree. Other sciences, and sciences have around 9%, and others include commerce, arts, social work, etc., which comes to about 14%. Interestingly, it is seen that around 80% of the entrepreneurs are first generation entrepreneurs, or they do not come from any business families. And 45.8% of them are serial entrepreneurs. That is, they have more than one firm. They have started more than one startup. So this is also a peculiar thing in the startup sector, that you don't just start one firm and then you grow with the firm. People often start one firm, work with it for 3 years, and then give the management to somebody else, or become a passive partner, and then move on to starting other firms, because entrepreneurs are generally innovators in this sector. So looking at this, we can say that the startup revolution has actually maybe created an entrepreneurship culture in the state by inducing 80% first, because 80% of them are first generation entrepreneurs, and around 45% are creating more than one firms. When you look at the diversity, it is seen that 86% firms have more than one founder. That is, this ensures complementarity in capabilities. That is, if you have, this is often an issue of study. If you have one partner who has a management degree and one partner who has an engineering degree, so the engineering person will take care of the technical side of it, and the other person will take care of the marketing and management side of it. So this is often said to be a reason. People often say that such complementarity in capabilities are helpful for startups. But in our sample, though there are such cases are there, most often startup founders are often pair up with their own friends or colleagues and have similar educational background and work experience. Gender diversity is rather poor. Over 70% firms have no women founders, and 59% have no women in the top management. When we look at the impact or performance of Kerala-based startups, there are some critical measurement issues, because very often it is said that conventional metrics like profitability cannot be used to capture the performance of startups, because startups may be running on loss for sustained for a long period of time. And even over 50%, close to 54% of the firms in our sample are also not cash flow positive. Some of the common matrices to measure the impact or performance of startups have been valuation, market valuation, which is a little subjective, because especially in the early stages. And there are also sector specific matrices like daily active users or average revenue per user for e-commerce firms. So because these are sector specific and cannot be used uniformly to compare different sectors, we examine parameters like innovativeness and employment, apart from revenue and external investment. So external investment is also a measure of performance, because it signals the trust that the external investor has in the growth opportunities of the firm, which is why he or she has invested in the firm. And one of the stated objectives of promoting startups is employment creation. So we look at the employment in a little more detailed manner. We see that around 62% of the firms have less than 10 employees. So in terms of large numbers, startups are not a huge employment creator, even though they have said that one of the main reasons for locating in Kerala is said to be availability of talent, availability of availability of talent at reasonable salaries. So, however, there is a trade-off. So, startups often want to maintain a lean firm size to reduce the cost. So they hire only when it's absolutely essential to hire, and instead they work with interns and pay-per-service workers. The general structure of startups, the firm structure is generally flat with no distinct role allocation. Most of the founders who were interviewed said that in a way all of them function with there are no all of them have multiple roles, including except for maybe marketing. All the technical team works as a team and then have equal role in innovation or ideation. When it comes to employee characteristics, it is seen that there is a focus on technical jobs. In over 45% of the firms, technical or core jobs constitute the lion's share of employment. And they also, in over 64% of the firms, majority of the employees, over 60% of the employees are professionally trained. In 28% of the firms, all the employees are professionally trained. That is, they have a professional degree, engineering or chartered accountancy, management, etc. They are also a relatively are relatively young organizations. In that, over in 62% of the startups, more than 80% of the employees are below 35, and about 20% of the firms have all their employees below 35. However, though they hire young people, they do not always hire inexperienced people. So there is a mix of freshers and experienced hands. Over 65% of the startups have less than 40% freshers, or people who are fresh out of college. So here I've noticed a distinction, that is, founders in emerging tech industries or cutting edge industries, they prefer employees with industry experience. However, relatively low tech industries, like they're not low tech exactly, but within the startup system, more industries such as IT or agri-tech, they prefer to hire employees fresh out of college and train them because they feel that is cheaper for them. However, prior work experience in other startups is not a common thing. In the industry experience is enough. Gender diversity in employment, 63% of the firms have only 1 to 5 women workers, and 13% startups have no women workers also. And we've previously seen that 30% of the firms have, less than 30% of the firms have women founders, and only 25% have at least one woman in the top management. So the gender aspect is, gender diversity is not, it's not gender, there is not much gender diversity in the in startups in Kerala. Contractual workers, 35%. Sir.
Krishnapriya, will you be able to conclude in about 2 or 3 minutes?
Okay, sir. I'll try. Okay. Contractual workers, 35% of the firms do not employ any temporary or contractual workers. But there are 45% of the firms have temporary workers. So these temporary or contractual workers are mostly interns. Internship is interns or paper service workers. So internship is often the route to employment. At least 10% of the founders said that their most common mode of recruitment has been through internship. And I also found an interesting case. So some of the academic incubators in Kerala. So one of the prestigious engineering college in Kerala had where one of the startups I had interviewed, they had an MOU with that company was incubated in this academic institution, and they had an MOU with the startup which said that the startup should provide internships for students of that institute, a fixed number of internships to students of that college. So this is a symbiotic relationship because students gain hands-on industry experience and startup is able to reduce its operational expenditure, and they get students that they just need to pay them a stipend. Also, these startups often go on to hire these students, so they reduce on their training expenditure as well. So such innovative agreements between incubators and startups are also there. Regarding employment, what I found was that there is a slight demand-supply mismatch. So over 30% of the firms recruiting via job hunting websites and social media forum reported that there is high demand for jobs in startups because of various reasons like high compensation packages and being the ability to be part of a firm at an early stage. So there is a high demand for jobs in startups. However, finding the right employee is a huge challenge despite the number of applications received because of inadequate skill levels among employees, salary expectations, and high turnover issues. So in this context, this digital workforce management system that the Kerala government has recently started, which acts as an aggregator for job seekers and job providers, this is a very welcome initiative. Some of the challenges pertaining to employment has been inadequate skill levels, high employee attrition, and salary expectations. I'll just go a little fast. Regarding innovation, startups in Kerala are generally innovative. 26% of them have at least one patent application, 8% have at least one patent, and over 3/4 of the firms have some form of intellectual property rights, but mostly it's trademarks. 56% of them have trademarks. I had also created an innovation score based on whether the firm has produced any new products or processes since its inception, and whether they undertake dedicated R&D. So based on that score, if you look at the table, you can see that most of the firms have a high mean. Like they either have they have at least 2 of the 3 innovation parameters. And when it comes to linkages to the international market, it is generally low, because import of embodied and disembodied technologies is generally low. So though innovation score indicates that there is continuous innovation, but the products and services developed are not largely disruptive, because when I looked at the novelty of product or service, it around 54% of the product or service is said to be an improved version of existing product or service. Only around 19% are new to the world, 15% new to the country, and 12% new to the industry. So there is innovation, there is continued innovation, incremental innovation happening. May not be as disruptive as startups are generally said to have. But there it shows promise, because around 3/4 of the firms invest in deep tech or emerging tech industries such as AI, data analytics, big data, or blockchain, etc. On looking at the performance, it was seen that 50% of the startups had no revenue in the last year. 26% of the firms had no revenue so far, and 54% firms do not have a positive cash flow, and only around 40% of the sample had undertaken market valuation. And the range of market valuation is also very stark, with some firms valued at 1 lakh and another valued at 40,000 lakhs. So there is a big diversity in the kind of startups in startup performance in Kerala. External financing, like I mentioned, external financing is also an indicator of performance. Most of the, if you look at the table, you can see that the largest external investment is from incubators and followed by government grants and loans. So angel investment, external equity financing like angel investment and venture capital has not really taken off. However, there is an increasing presence of angel investors. Even like last week, Kerala Startup Mission had organized an investor meet. But in the population at large, only a few firms have attained venture capital financing. Here I've done some odds ratio analysis for which show that innovation and performance are related. I'll just mention. So average cumulative. So firms which have an innovation score of 2 have the highest average cumulative revenue, and intellectual property and firms with some form of IPR are 1.35 times more likely to have positive cash flow. So these are just these show that innovation is linked to performance and employment is linked to performance. Now I'll move on to the last part, which is the role of the government. Over 62% of the respondents noted that KSUM has been very helpful, in their startup journey. But benefits derived in the form of largely it has been in networking opportunities, direct funding assistance through seed stage grant, research grant, productization grant, etc. And other things like infrastructure supporting services, direct procurement facilities by the government. And around 30% of them said they haven't taken any help so far. When this was on the question of what possible challenges they see for the growth of their firm, many of them said that funding is a major hurdle for their growth. Physical infrastructure is a moderate hurdle. That is because for some firms, especially manufacturing firms, they mentioned that especially manufacturing firms in cutting edge technologies, mentioned that it is a moderate hurdle. Digital infrastructure and government regulation are not seen as hurdles at all. Contract management, for some firms it was, but largely it is not. Competition is also a minor hurdle. Visibility and mentorship were quoted to be important main challenges to their development. Same with funds for innovation. Because innovation entails uncertainty, funding is difficult to come by, especially in the early stages. So the conclusion is that though Kerala has been an early entrant into the startup arena, like I mentioned, the TBI at Technopark was established in 2006. Startup Village, when it came up, it was the first time in India that a PPP model incubator was set up. That came up in Cochin. And Kerala was very proactive in enacting Kerala Technology Startup Policy Act in 2014, much before other states. But it is still a nascent ecosystem. It is yet to see a unicorn. That is a startup which is valued over 1 billion. Growth of startups and growth of funding is slow, and it is largely government led. And from the discussions with the founders, one of the major reasons seem to be the absence of a robust industrial sector. And that is actually hindering the organic evolution of a startup ecosystem here. So there are studies by Balasubramania who explains the evolution of Bangalore and Hyderabad as startup clusters in India. So he talks about the presence of triple helix, academia, industry, and government. The government is strong here, but the others are weak links, especially the industry. And absence of linkages with to the industry. This affects funding also, because many in other ecosystems we see that many large corporate leaders typically invest in startups, and this it affects mentorship and it affects innovation, because there's not much scope for startup corporate collaborations. So all these affect the growth of startups. And absence of incumbent firms with specialized knowledge in these sectors, it also causes infrastructural bottlenecks. And because now the firms, these specialized firms in Kerala have to depend on other ecosystems for their supporting services or consulting services, which is costlier. Another reason, it seems to be the decentralized approach to startup development. So unlike other states where the government aims to develop a capital or the largest city as a startup cluster, Kerala seems to be following a decentralized model with government investments in multiple cities and districts. So the objective seems to be to have the potential for startups to emerge in every town and village. However, the development of history of development of startup hubs globally shows us that agglomeration is the key to development of tech startups. And theory also shows that knowledge spillover theory of entrepreneurship also shows that localization of specialized knowledge is required for knowledge spillovers to happen and for creation of new firms. So this means that like a bare minimum threshold of employable talent, related industries, in industry leaders and knowledge generating organizations like established companies, universities, and research organizations are needed to fuel the growth of startups or for startups to spin off in those regions. So many of the some of the startup founders actually suggested that like if one city like maybe Cochin or Trivandrum is focused on, or that would be a better it might be better to build an ecosystem around an existing urban agglomeration. So just by supplying whatever deficient ingredients are there, that might yield a better return than a decentralized approach of having startups in every town or village. Similarly, Kerala, it's over, sir. Kerala has a conducive environment and resources for development of certain startups in certain sectors like IT, ITES, electronics, and reinvented traditional sectors. However, some emerging tech industries founders said that there are certain disadvantages for those sectors in Kerala due to lack of mentorship, experienced talent, lack of infrastructure, etc. So KSUM could selectively focus on promoting sectors, startups in these sectors where Kerala has a comparative advantage and substantial resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Krishnapriya. Again, another very interesting paper looking at entrepreneurship in Kerala. Now, these three papers, I had seen some connection between the three papers. Of course, the broad topic is entrepreneurship and employment. While Professor Mohanakumar looked at how pandemic kind of was instrumental in kind of attracting some of the surplus labor into NG and REGs. This pandemic story was kind of drawn by Nalini Netto also into how tourism as a sector was kind of affected during the pandemic, as well as looking at generally tourism as both as an employment as well as an entrepreneurial option for people in Kovalam, and how it actually gets affected. Tourism, I mean, the livelihood of people gets affected because of the narrowing down of options in the local region as such, right? So in a way, tourism kind of the too much focus of tourism as an entrepreneurial option, that kind of reduces their livelihood options as such. And on the other hand, we had that player speaking about entrepreneurship itself now, the new ways of, or the new sectors, the new types of on startups that are rising in the state across. Now the floor is open for discussion. I can see that there are a lot of chats, that is parallel chats that are going on. If you would like to, please put them up as questions if you want to ask them, or else I can read them up also. The floor is open. Please either raise your hands and ask your questions, or you can just kind of voice out and start asking the questions. Okay, since there are no questions coming up, let me just read out one or two of the chats that has been going on in the thing. Yes, Sri Balagopal.
I have several questions, but I think I'll start with one for Professor Mohanakumar. He mentioned about he gave some very interesting data from his survey on labor force participation rates. I was just thinking that one of the effects of this pandemic, particularly across the world and also in Kerala, has been, and this is related to this work from home and work near home and online working for all kinds of businesses, and the new businesses coming up, traditional businesses being affected, livelihoods. So what is happening here is, I think the whole notion of work itself is going to be questioned and interrogated in a way which it has never been in the last 100 years. So, so this whole question of what is employment, I'm not talking about definitional things about whether the person is available for work, etc. But even if you take this whole who is unemployed, who is employed, etc., and with the emergence of things like gig work, I feel that we need to probably relook at this labor market, because the traditional notion of the labor market itself probably needs questioning. Specifically, and one more observation. So my question is, does not the notion of labor market itself require, or else you'll have to add new categories, like some people are available for part-time work, some people are available for 1 or 2 days work a week. So the whole notion of this becomes changed from somebody offering themselves for full-time work. So is that not a major disruption that has happened due to the pandemic? This question is for Professor Mohanakumar.
Let's take more questions and then we'll come back. So there are other questions. Yes.
Vinoj, this is Harilal.
Yes, Harilal, sir.
Let me ask a question again to Mohanakumar. It is also related to the question raised by Mr. Balagopal here. See, during the pandemic, that a lot of people could continue to work from home, and that facility was available to certain kind of people specializing in academics, software industry, etc., etc. But for many other categories of workers, working from home option was not there. And that is true of casual workers and all, who are engaged mainly in manual work, on-site work. Here is the question. See, when the floods came, Kerala government took special initiative to make maximum use of MNREGS. And there were several rounds of conferences, and local governments were participating, and that effort succeeded in using MNREGS to give employment in flood-affected areas. But when it came to pandemic, in the initial, at least in the first year, MNREGS couldn't be used because they were not allowed to really move in groups to do work. And most of the work in MNREGS wanted grouping of workers, collection of workers to execute tasks. So later, in fact, no, some strategy was found out to have smaller groups to work and all, so that no social distancing can be observed. But initially, it was a major problem because that was a major hindrance in using MNREGS to give employment to workers. Now, I would like Mohanakumar to respond to this question because this goes against the finding, at least for the first year.
Yeah. So we can take one or two of the first 2-3 comments also. There is a comment from Professor John Kurian for Nalini Netto. Fishing communities have usually only got the crumbs of coastal tourism development. Does the SL approach, that is the sustainable livelihood approach, adequately factor in the element of power and class or caste elements, which are all important determinants of the outcomes relating to all the capitals? That's one. And the second is a comment that is Adani Port will also soon bring an end to tourism in Kovalam. That's for Nalini Netto. And then we have a comment, it's a comment to all, but then I think Krishnapriya can take this up. Regarding the definition of startup, is every new venture that starts small with promoter funds a startup? He has a comment, my company based on know-how from national level to startup. The know-how was untried, unproven. We had to discover everything ourselves. Several other companies also started small and grew organically. Why should every new venture not be treated as a startup and eligible for support? Let's take the these first set of questions, and I request Professor Mohanakumar to start responding. After that, we'll follow the same order. Can't hear you. You're not audible. I think you're mute. Mohanakumar, you're on mute.
Am I audible now? Yeah.
Yes, you are.
Thank you, Mr. Balagopal and Professor Harlal, for the questions. To Dr. Balagopal, the question is whether you are working from home or you are unemployed. These two are different categories. If you are working from home, it will definitely be captured in the CMI survey quarterly. They collect the data on a quarterly basis, like the periodical labor force survey. The difference between periodical labor force survey, which was not conducted during their report has not come for the peak pandemic period, but the CMI has brought out. If the respondent has worked or available for work or seeking work, it will definitely be captured. If the respondent is working in the pandemic period, in the reference period of the survey, it is considered as employed. If the respondent is available for work or seeking for work, but not able to get work, it is unemployed. In this case, the unemployment rate reported during the last quarter of the 2021, that shows the level of unemployment in Kerala. What I was trying to drive home in this case is that there was as compared to other states, the level of unemployment in the last phase of the pandemic, the 2021 last quarter, was relatively low, and that could be one of the reasons why. And the suicides due to unemployment reason happened to be low in Kerala. That was the relation I wanted to work out. But relatively, the unemployment rate was low in Kerala during the 2021 last quarter. I think I have answered this question, but the CMI also have this problem. They don't, conceptually explain, as in the case of NSO, that the detailed description of the concepts they use in it. A Harlal question, of course, Harlal, I do agree with Harlal in this case that MGNREGA had problems, like in other parts of India, to mobilize workers to provide work during the pandemic phase and flood period of floods. But the case is that as compared to other states in India, MGNREGA implementation was more effective in Kerala during the 2021 period. The number of days, I have worked out some 5 indicators, and all 5 indicators, the number of days made available to the laborers who are willing to work were significantly higher in Kerala as compared to other states. But the question is that there has been a decline in the work participation rate. The work participation rate decline means that the people have withdrawn from the labor market, either in the form that they were seeking work but not finding adequate, the work which they can be productively employed, so they have permanently withdrawn from the work. Where have they gone? This is a question which is very serious. They are the productive labor force phase, and one has to find out where are they hiding and why they are not available for work. This is because this could be because the type of work they are searching for is not available. But in the earlier periods of the year 21, it was available. One has to really look into where are they parked with. This is the question which I am relating with the theoretical framework of they might have gone into the stagnant labor force, which will deteriorate the skill that they have acquired over the years. This is the response to this question. Thank you, Professor Halal and Mr. Balagopal for responding to my presentation. Thank you, Vinoj.
Yes, thanks. Ma'am, Nalini ma'am. No, not audible, ma'am. No, still not audible.
Change this. I'll just off the video.
Yeah, it's better now. You can hear.
Better. Okay.
Yes.
So thanks to Professor John Kurian for the comments. They are actually valid in the sense that power actually can be incorporated. I have actually taken only 5 of these capitals as an institutional capital. Power in terms of local self-government, the effect of politicians, the influence of politicians, and the powerful people, how they derive power, that can also be included as a capital, but I have not done it in my analysis because I wanted to restrict it to the traditional analysis and incorporated 1 or 2 of them in the social capital. Class and caste, of course. Caste is definitely a factor in some areas, especially when you look at deprived classes. You have an issue, but this issue has also not been factored in this analysis. I have basically no comment to give on this Adani port bringing an end to tourism in Kovalam. Even otherwise, I think as a destination, Kovalam is actually on its stagnation and decline. So, how things will take shape?
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Krishnapriya, can you respond?
So, the definition of startup is indeed it's indeed a key factor here, and I think from a policy perspective, sir, every new firm can be considered a startup and supported. However, my submission is that technology startups, as understood globally, have certain unique characteristics, and one of them being exponential growth and scaling, and not organic growth. So an innovative firm which has organic growth, it is still worthy of support, and it should be. And if it has just started up, it is a startup. However, it is not a typical technology-based startup, as I understood globally. So, from a policy perspective, Kerala government should support all kinds of firms, regardless of whether it is a tech startup or not. Tech startup in the definition that I had mentioned. And I also agree that startups should not be restricted to IT ventures. So many of the firms that I got a chance to interview were in agri-tech, space tech, and waste management. None of them were using IT. But I don't know, sir, if if we can say that manufacturing has done very well in Kerala. Like I'm sure there are some firms who have done well in manufacturing, and yours being a very good example. But manufacturing and this central, the factor-based production systems require certain factors like land, low-cost land, and low operational costs.
Krishnapriya, we have lost you.
Sir?
Krishnapriya?
Hello, sir. Can you hear me, sir? Sir?
Priya. Hello.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, sir. So my argument is not that no manufacturing firm will be successful in Kerala. I just feel that it is easier for service sector firms, which for non-factor based production systems to develop kind of.
That's not the evidence. I don't agree. Anyway, that's the standard view.
Sir, I agree that I had attended your presentation, I think last year, when you had presented about 32 firms that you had interviewed and you had looked at. I agree that there are, during my interviews, I also came across some firms who had actually set up manufacturing facilities in Kerala and done very well. The point is not that manufacturing won't do well in Kerala. It is just that it is the chances of service sector and knowledge-based industries doing well are just higher. Because
please look at the evidence of where are these knowledge-based industries and where are these service sector firms. Give evidence of that. I have given enough evidence of manufacturing, but I find that we slip into this thing that service sector works. Where is the evidence?
Okay, sir. I'll get back to you on that, sir. And the view of startups should not be restricted to IT ventures. I completely agree with that, sir. The sampling membership in the data.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are a few more other comments and questions in the chat box. Would the participants take it up and ask it now, or if there are any other questions, they can ask now also. Can those questions can be asked by the participants themselves? Sri Balagopal? Yes. Yes.
Vinoj?
Yes. Is it Murugan? Yeah.
Yeah.
Please, Murugan.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Can I speak?
Yes. Yes. Please go ahead.
Vinoj, yeah, I have got only one question to Mohanakumar and another. I don't know whether it is a question or a comment on Madam Nalini Netto's work. The first question is to Mohanakumar because he is making a Marxian framework for the theoretical base. Whereas when he analyzes a pandemic, which is constrained by the institutional inhibitions, how it will be suitably fitting into the theoretical framework in a Marxian perspective. That is one of the questions, because there are a lot of restrictions that is imposed by the institutional factors and constraints that are incorporated by the government, and other self-imposed institutions also have worked, and also other impediments. So in that context, where generalized Marxian framework, how will it work? That is the first question. And the second question is to Madam Nalini Netto. That is, I think she is using a livelihood index and also a radar diagram. So in both cases, she says that, if I understood correctly, that the results are not robust. In the absence of a statistical test measure, how will it be possible for her to measure the robustness of that data? I think some measure of statistical, some statistical measure is a requirement to say robustness. The problem with index and the radar diagram, if my understanding is correct, is that they are not testable. Both are based on a scale and all that. So in that case, if she wants to test it specifically, she should go for a fuzzy inference analysis, where the testability is there, particularly the zero working version of the fuzzy inference test. Thank you. These are the two small things which I have to make.
Thank you, Sri Murugan. Would you like to respond, Nalini ma'am? And hello?
Can I respond?
Yeah, please go ahead, ma'am.
Thanks, Murugan, for the comment. In fact, I have not done any test of robustness. All I meant in that case, I never said the results are not robust. I said the asset pentagon is not robust. In that case, it's used in the context of, in the fullness of the pentagon is what it's meant in that context. It is not based on any statistical test. I fully agree with you that if you want to say that, I have to do further analysis. The analysis is required. I don't intend going into it at this point in my research. But maybe I need not use the word robust in that case. It was only used in the context of asset pentagon. I did not mention anything regarding the results.
Thanks. Professor Mohanakumar?
Thank you, Dr. Murugan, for your question. I do agree with you, Murugan, that the framework that I have presented for rural surplus population is a generalized framework. Absolutely no doubt on that. But the question is, what I was trying to say in this whole contest is that the pandemic has pushed a large chunk of population, working population, into the permanent redundancy. Redundancy in the sense that they would not be able to come back to their occupation because their skills are being deteriorated, and there is, at the global level, there is going to be a heavy pressure in the rural labor, in the labor market. As a result, usually the latent and segment, latent and stagnant population would be able to come back to their occupation in the labor market when the situation spring back to normalcy. It is not going to happen, and how it will work? It will work in the long run is that there will be a deflation of wage rate, and in this case, the state of Kerala has to be distinguished by implementing effectively MGNRAGA during the pandemic phase. The government could accommodate a large section, even if it is not a large section, a considerable section of the working population by providing livelihood at a rate which is significantly less than the market wage rate, but the government could intervene. Partly because of that, partly by supplying daily provisions in terms of kit and others, that the government, the state intervention could help them. This has not happened at the national level and at the provincial level in the case of other states. Of course, to a certain extent, we can argue that the general framework that the rural surplus population, which Marx has explained in his explanation for the long-run tendency of wage rate to converge into the historically determined wage rate, historically determined average wage rate. This has happened, but it an extent that the government of Kerala, by implementing effectively NREGA, could sustain a part of the labor force. This is what I was trying home in the whole analysis. Thank you, Dr. Murugan, for your question.
Thanks. Krishnapriya, there is one question in the chat box. Can you just, if you would like to take it up, from Professor John Kurian, about the characteristics of entrepreneurs who finally prove to be successful. I feel they are very special people, and this is indeed one of the important reasons for their success. What are your views on this? Do you have any response to that? If you can, it will be interesting. Yeah.
Yes, sir. In the literature, there is a strand of literature which talks about entrepreneurial traits and how that leads to success in entrepreneurship. But what I felt that more than individual traits per se, it is the connections or the networks and social capital that the entrepreneur has, which impacts the success of startups. I do not have data to back this, but I did my undergrad and postgrad at IIT Madras. So I have seen that many of the startups, many of my seniors and even juniors have become successful startups because they have a large resource to tap into. Because startups is all about getting, of course, the product, the innovation and the product is important. However, the visibility and networking is also very important for startups. And if many of the successful startups have a background, they are either from premier institutes within India or outside India, and they have connections which they can tap into to get funding and sustain their product and do enough marketing so that the product or service is also successful. So I feel that more than traits per se, like risk, in the literature, there are people talk about risk-taking ability and those kind of traits which are generally considered to be important for startup, for entrepreneurs. That is important, but apart from that, these networks are also important, is what I would say.
Okay. Thank you. So our time is up now for the session. If there is one last question anyone wants to ask, we can take that up. Otherwise, there are a few discussions that are in the chat box. I think it is helpful for the paper presenters as well as others who are interested in the area. Please read up the chat box. There are quite a few comments over there. Please read it up. I'm not going to take all of them. It's not possible to take all on each one of them to read it up, since our time is up. If there is one question to ask, please raise your hand or come in between. I guess there are no more questions to be asked by the participants. We'll close the session right now. Thank you very much. Firstly, Professor Devika, for the opportunity for me to be here. And then thank you, the three presenters, Professor Mohanakumar, Ms. Nalini Netto, and Ms. Krishnapriya, for those wonderful presentations. All the three papers were very rich, consisting both of primary and secondary level data and intensely researched. I mean, these are debatable issues. All the three questions that you had, one about labor, the other about tourism, and the local fixedness of tourism, and also the third question about startups and entrepreneurships, how successful they are. All very important questions in the context of Kerala. I'm sure it will actually generate more discussions in future. Thank you very much for these three presentations and also for the discussions that you have done. Thank you to all the participants for being here and for the rich discussion that we've done on this particular thing. Thank you very much. And we'll close this session for the day. Thank you. I now pass on to Dr. Professor Devika.
Thank you.
Yes, I agree with Vinoj in every way that this was a very thought-provoking discussion. Thank you for the papers. They are very rich and, give us a lot of food for thought. Just about the results, but also the methodologies. So I've been personally thinking about how one can study labor under present conditions. When data itself is becoming more and more difficult to, labor is, the more it gets informalized, the more fuzzy it becomes and more difficult to study. And so how do you study fuzzy objects that appear and disappear is a methodological question for me. So I think all three presentations pushed my thinking a little bit, and I thank you all for that. And now, of course, we break for lunch and then meet again for the discussion on the Silver Line. This is at 3 o'clock. This is a debate, and we have two prominent speakers, Dr. Thomas Isaac and Dr. K.P. Kannan, both from CDS, representing two absolutely different viewpoints on the question. It is going to be structured like a proper debate, with a motion and with people, someone arguing for it and someone arguing against it. I hope you join us for that. In case the WebEx becomes too crowded, then we will be live streaming it on YouTube. And you can actually even post questions on the YouTube. You can do that also on the, and then we can take that forward. But of course, we have little time. I mean, we don't have as much time as we would like to. The debate starts at 3, and we thought we can close it at 4:30, but maybe will be take a little more than that. Well, see you at 3 o'clock then, and thank you again for both presenters as well as participants.
Bye.